Welcome to Kaiju Classics. This is the show where I intend to painstakingly agonize over like 50 different movies starring large monsters in all sorts of delightful varieties. Kaiju and monster films each carry an immeasurable charm that I hope to capture here in this series. So whether you've just watched one or all of these movies and want a book club sort of discussion, or are just curious about some of the lesser known early Showa entries, I'm pleased to have you. Last episode started this series, and we covered the very first Godzilla, which released in 1954. Then we went over its sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, in 1955. So today we're covering the next project that came after, the first kaiju film by Toho to singularly feature a new monster, and in color to boot, Rodan. We will first discuss the history and production of the film, bringing up how it was first conceived and the process of bringing it to the silver screen. Then we'll move on to the actual movie and I'll offer my review and analysis, both of the plot and the monster that gives the genre and this series its name. So why don't we just jump right into the history that led to the creation of this movie. How did Rodan come out? Let's find out. The success of Godzilla and even Godzilla Raids Again spoke for itself. This was a mine that was worth drilling and any company would pursue it further. Producer Tomoyuki Tanaka, who first derived the idea for Godzilla, met with Ishiro Honda, the director, and Eiji Tsuburaya, the instrumental special effects director. The three of them eventually arrived at the concept of a large flying monster, based on a real-life monster, the Archaeopteryx. Tanaka hired the writer Takeshi Ken Koronuma, who was a fairly popular sci-fi writer, to make a treatment for the film. His concept was a large portion of what we see in the final movie, where a supersonic flying monster is chased by fighter planes. It was based on a real-life news story that had done many rounds by this point. It was the Mantell UFO incident. In January of 1948, Captain Thomas F. Mantell died while piloting a fighter jet. He was chasing after what he thought was a UFO, ignoring all warnings to stop as he climbed higher and higher. Eventually, without enough oxygen to stay conscious, he plummeted to his untimely demise. Later, it was determined through observations of an Air Force base control tower, the thing he was chasing was likely to be a skyhook balloon, a then top-secret government program for atmospheric research. To be honest, that would lead me to think Rodan would be some sort of spacey sci-fi movie, but that'll come later in the series. Instead, Honda, along with the screenwriters Takeo Murata and Takeshi Kimura, worked it into the odd horror kaiju hybrid story it is now, but we'll get into what that means a little bit later. They shot on location at Mount Aso and the coal mining town in the Nagasaki prefecture. There were some production woes, as there almost always are with these monster flicks, and I'll bring them up as we see the actual scenes they refer to later. Like I mentioned earlier, it has some relevance in being the first color film on this list and of Honda's career. Often, color versus black and white mostly came down to budget, so that's interesting to know. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get right into the movie. So in Rodan, we can sort of separate it into two segments: the plight of the workers at a local coal mine, and the usual struggle against the large kaiju once it emerges. I found the first part to be quite unique. It opens as a real mystery. We get these tight claustrophobic shots of a coal mine where every one of the many workers are packed together in the sweltering heat. Eventually, news of a flood in the mine reaches the management, and upon inspection they discover a body. The cause of death is quite confusing, as the corpse is slashed and died from said cuts. Suspicion hangs heavy over the many coal miners. Ironically, the answer ends up not being the large monster on the poster, as the viewer might suspect, nor one of the coal miners, as the many characters suspect. Instead, this hilariously incredible scene shows the sudden appearance of these terrifying bug-like creatures. Large, frighteningly dangerous. I really like their designs. They look like something from a different kind of weird horror movie, you know, like a Western B-movie type of situation. They eventually get roped into a reveal later in the movie, which is a great payoff, so keep these in mind. But, like a lot of these early Showa-era films, the characters are quite simple and aren't really followed in a conventional manner. It is small and personal in the first section, where these workers are handling the deaths of their colleague, the growing mystery, and the accusations and discoveries attached, but after an earthquake near the volcano, a small scene shows the titular Rodan emerging from the earth. Now the film takes a much wider lens. He's still shrouded in mystery, almost akin to a UFO, clearly mimicking its inspirations. We can see him race all across the world, quickly establishing the impossible speeds this creature is capable of. Governments convene, attempting to make sense of it all. The protagonist that heavily featured in the coal mining section is only relevant now since he induced a memory-altering injury as the entity appeared. Wrecked with amnesia, it's likely he saw something important, but is unable to exactly recall. Eventually, the sight of a bird hatching from an egg spurs on the memory of the miner witnessing Rodan's birth. The monstrous bird pecks away at the man-sized bugs that previously terrorized our cast. Nothing more than baby's food now, smartly sort of raising the stakes and roping back these weird other creatures in an exciting manner. So let's take a little break and discuss Rodan himself. I always love giving my thoughts on each suit and creature design. This is the second new, full-size kaiju we've seen in the series so far, so that's quite special. Rodan is quite the simple monster. It's directly evocative of a pterodactyl, just a little bit bigger. The suit is quite impressively made, and the airborne shots look great. I really thought there'd be a lot more still images zooming around, or things like that. But instead, a liberal use of strings means we get to fully indulge in this airborne creature without limitation. However, like I said before, there were some issues executing these great shots. Multiple times strings broke on set. One shot that made it into the movie is actually one where they broke. Right by this bridge, Haru Nakajima plummets into the water quite accidentally. But luckily, the water and the frustratingly thick, padded suit was enough to break his fall, so as far as I'm aware, no injuries were occurred. Just funny it made it into the final movie. But back to it, I think the plain dinosaur design could be a little bit boring if the speed wasn't conveyed so well. The way the buildings are torn from their foundations by the sheer wind pressure, the shards are pulled in the direction of the shooting bullet of a monster. Japan is a country that is often ravaged by typhoons and intense weather. I'm fortunate enough to have never needed to worry about any of these sorts of threats, so personally I have a distance to it. But the creators and the viewers of this film when it came out were likely horribly aware of the damage these weather events can cause. So much like the terror of the bomb, Rodan really illustrates the terror of a typhoon. It can just pass through your area without actual intent of harm. It does not destroy buildings for glee or for territory, it's just nature. I think it's quite effective as a straightforward, early kaiju. The intention was to give the beast credibility and authenticity. That's likely the reason its nuclear-ridden predecessor has been replaced with something a lot more plausible, just a big dinosaur conveyed in as much terrifying realism as they could achieve. Honda was really fond of treating these kaijus as creatures, as real living things in this world, and I think Rodan might show that the most out of any of his films. Later down the line, these monsters begin to develop more personality and character. Once we reach Ghidorah, I can explain that dichotomy further, but for now, these are just animals, disasters, forces of nature. Rodan is a platonic ideal of that idea. Not disappointing or redundant, but also not doing anything so impressive as to elevate the formula. So those are my general takes. Now, let's get back to it. The rest of the movie now centers on the military's attempt to defeat Rodan. Lots of long shots where tanks and missile launchers strike the almost impervious monster. As their battle wages on, a second Rodan pops up out of the blue, almost comically. It's a little sudden. Eventually it culminates in the military striking the volcano to agitate it and bury Rodan. It erupts and catches one of them in the wing, both slowly plummet to the ground and become engulfed in flame, bringing the movie to a close. So now it's time for the review. As a film, it doesn't really waste too much time, which I appreciate. There are sort of two ways to view its unique structure, either something fun and experimental, or disjointed and clumsy, and I kind of land in the middle. I love the first half, the tension created by the busy shots of cramped, dust-covered workers all stressed and worried. It's just exciting, it's evocative, it has a real strength to it. The mystery and B-movie horror is a ton of fun. It has a really strong sense of atmosphere and building tension. I think the whole thing is quite effective. But the way any of the human drama sort of fizzles out once the monster intensity begins is quite unfortunate. A common symptom of this genre in the Showa era, we're going to deal with it quite a lot. I enjoy the latter half too. The special effects take center stage and Tsuburaya is able to flex his military fetishism as much as he wants. But the plot sort of stops here, without much of an arc or a direction as far as I'm concerned. While we still have a protagonist who has some relevance to the discovery of Rodan and only steps away near the end, there's little heart to the individual stories in my opinion. It pulls the camera out and becomes something a lot broader, but that can have its own sort of appeal. I think it's quite fascinating how they use Rodan's airborne status to create this international conflict. He's not bound by the geographical lines of each country, so the different countries need to come together in order to handle the crisis. International collaboration is a concept Honda was deeply fascinated with, and it shows up in a ton of his works, especially when he actually has creative control over them. We'll see what happens when he loses that in quite a few more videos past this. So I like the concept and the ideas behind this side of the film, but I do feel like the execution is lacking. It doesn't really give you much to hang on to, any real drama or extended conflict that's interesting to watch unravel. It feels slightly cold and distant, but not to any greater point or theme. The international collaboration is cool in theory, but it doesn't really get into the challenges of it, the benefits of it, what that means. It's just a thing that happens. Especially when it becomes a special effects focused flick, which, to be fair, most of these movies are. And on that basis alone, Rodan absolutely delivers. It is still exciting and wild to see the flying beast zoom through the frame and carry an entire tornado behind it, or to discover the odd buzzing creature around the corner hunting the coal miners. That sort of magic is the heart of these films, and that's here in spades. But to be clear, the cutoff point between these two sides, the slow, simple human element and the wider international monster element, isn't quite so simple as like the halfway point between the movie. It sort of jumps around in the middle and it can feel a little jarring, suddenly abandoning the protagonist, then bringing him back, then abandoning him again throughout. The fact I find it so hard to exactly describe the linear events is sort of the problem. It isn't complicated, it's just a little messy. A lot of disparate parts, each with their own pros and cons sort of slapped together. But that description makes it sound like there's no value to these parts, or it was just lazily thrown together, and I really don't think that's the case. Overall, there's a lot to love about this film, and it's interesting just how much this codified the Toho Kaiju formula for a while. Godzilla was the original, but Rodan established the standard. I think the movie has a solid identity of its own as the first non-Godzilla film, and acts as a strong mark of what to expect from the early Toho Kaiju films. But as we continue on in the list, it's sort of disjointed and inconsistent plot, and slightly lackluster second half will really lock it into good rather than truly great. I like the first part quite a lot, and I'm shocked they managed to execute so well on the visuals of a flying monster despite the obvious constraints. But its greatest weakness is the lack of a strong theme or narrative hook throughout. The human drama just is a little too weak, and it relies quite heavily on what eventually does just become the formula. As we see further iterations, I feel like Rodan will truly feel like a baseline for quality as we go. Now, as we arrive at the end of the video, we come for time to rank. The goal of this project is to not only discuss every monster, but I thought a funny little framing device would be to also rank them against each other. With only 2 movies on the board, it's pretty easy to place this third one. The original Godzilla is a movie of the ages, and its sequel is a pretty lackluster retread, so Rodan comfortably finds its home between the two. Which brings us to the end of our video. If you enjoyed my discussion of Rodan, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're interested in more. Next time I'm going to be talking about the 1957 movie The Mysterians, an under-discussed entry into the Toho Kaiju repertoire. See you then. Thank you very much for watching.